Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Alan Mayberry, Vice President of Regulatory Affairs at JANA Corporation and formerly Associate Administrator for Pipeline Safety at PHMSA. Welcome to the session this afternoon called The Role of GPAC and LPAC in Pipeline Safety, and Do They Deliver to the Public? We'll have introductions here in a minute, but I'd like to get a head count here on who is here for the first time from the public or from anywhere. Okay, awesome. So you're going to learn a bit in here, and I'm going to tell you what we're going to cover with you. So we're going to try to, we'll lead in easily, and then you're going to hear some dialogue up here that is going to be on some issues that have been going on for some time, but hopefully that lead in will help you and help you understand this very important these very important committees that are used by PHMSA's Office of Pipeline Safety to help drive policy making. So really, you're going to hear what it is, why it's important, and something that you may not be, and it's very important, words matter, but the consensus nature of the committee. And talk a little bit more about that in a second. We're going to provide, hopefully you'll see, and you will see definitely public insight into the unique decision-making process at PHMSA. You'll get insight on how advisory committees, and specifically these two, operate and how to engage in the process, how you can engage in the process, and then provide the public insight about differing perspectives and about the effectiveness of these committees to reach what we call consensus. And on that note, on consensus, if you look it up in the dictionary, it means general agreement. It doesn't necessarily mean being unanimous. Fortunately, many times when you have a diverse body, and you work together closely, there are many times you do reach unanimity, but it's not always the case, and certainly we drive toward consensus, and therefore it's important to play team ball. These are teams really that need to work well together. But basically what they are, there are two committees, like I said, GPAC and LPAC, or Gas Pipeline Advisory Committee and Liquid Pipeline Advisory Committee, and that's the informal name of them. If you look in the statute under PHMSA's authorization, the actual name of it in statute, it may be confusing. It's the Technical Pipeline Safety Advisory Committee. That's the Gas Committee. And the Liquid Committee in statute says the Technical Hazardous Liquid Pipeline Safety Standards Committee, THPLSSC. So we shortened it a few years ago and made it a lot easier to just say GPAC and LPAC. So that rolls off our, we're just used to dealing with that. And why is that important? Well, first off, okay, so it's a committee and it's made up of 15 members each. GPAC has 5 members of the public, 5 members of industry, and 5 members who are affiliated with a government agency, state or federal. Same with LPAC, the Liquid Advisory Committee, 5 each of those groups. And that gives you a representative sample of the different stakeholders that are out there. You have an even number for each one, each committee, or for each stakeholder group. And why are these committees important? Well, they advise the agency, specifically the Secretary of Transportation, the Administrator, on the direction the agency should take in policymaking. And we'll get into that process here in a minute. And how they do that, like I said, they work on consensus, and they, it's a big requirement to play team ball. And that, therefore, in standing up the committee and making appointments, and it's important that we have, people that have the subject matter expertise and are able to work, just able to work collaboratively. That's just so important when you are dealing with some of the issues in the sausage making of rulemaking. This group gets involved at the very end of the rulemaking process. It starts many times a few years before the committee has even stood up to review a rule. But for a standard rulemaking process, the agency issues what we call a notice of proposed rulemaking. And it's published in the Federal Register. Just for your information, the Federal Register, it's like the New York Times for the federal government. That's where you go, that's where the federal government, not just PHMSA, publishes everything for the public to see. You can sign up for notifications. It's very easy to do. And if you're interested, I would recommend you do that, and you can keep up with things that the agency issues. There are a couple of ways to do that in the various websites of the government, but Federal Register is one such source of information. And again, it's a repository that's the newspaper that's used. There is a law, like anything in Washington, there's a background. So advisory committees really evolved out of the post-war, World War II era of industrialization and rapid expansion of U.S. Industry. In particular, and similar in line with that, having controls in place to advise the government and processes in place to advise the government from experts who can guide the various federal agencies on how to land on rulemakings. So there's an act, a very important act, that is really a guiding light for the group or groups, and it's the Federal Advisory Committee Act, or FACA. And advisory committees, whether it's these two or others across the federal government, they're chartered under those rules. And the charter, each committee has a charter which covers the mission, goals, and objectives. And those charters are reviewed and updated every 2 years. And actually, that's a standard process in place to make sure that the committees are still relevant, and that so they're re-upped every year. I'm going to move on because we do have a bit to go over here, but I did want to give you a short primer up front. What was my role as associate administrator? I was kind of the career head for Office of Pipeline Safety, but I'm also what was referred to as a designated federal official, and that's outlined in the FACA, or the statute. And I'm the one who stands up the committee, of course, working in cooperation with the administration, but I'm the one who sets up meetings. I say I am, but it's with a huge, incredible staff at the PHMSA Office of Pipeline Safety. And again, like I was talking this morning, when I say I mean the role. Associate administrator is the designated federal official who really keeps organization over the advisory committees. The committees are, in the charter, they meet up to about four times per year. Under the new charter that is in effect until October of next year, the meetings will be virtual, and that's the plan. The new charter, which was revised under the new administration, does mandate that the meetings are virtual. I say mandate, there are provisions for exceptions to that. And of course, there are opinions on how virtual works when you're dealing with the sausage making of working together on a recommendation to give to the agency. And we could talk about that probably a good bit there too. So anyway, without further ado, I did want to have the panelists introduce themselves. And we'll just go one by one. I would ask the panelists to introduce yourself, what's your experience in working with the committees, and if you could add also, do you view the advisory committees as effective and successful? So why don't we start with you, Dave?
All right. Thank you, Alan. Hi, my name is Dave Danner, and until January of 2025, I was the chair of the Washington Utilities and Transportation Commission, which is the state agency in Washington State that regulates the safety of pipelines. It also regulates the rates and services of investor-owned natural gas utilities. And so that is the experience that I brought when I was appointed to the GPAC. I was first appointed by Secretary Fox back in the Obama administration, was reappointed in the first Trump administration, and then appointed again under the Biden administration. So I've been on the GPAC for quite a while. I view GPAC as an effective group. It is, in my opinion, an advisory group, not a decision-making group. But it really was, it was informative in terms of, working with people from diverse backgrounds and diverse interests to reach consensus, which for the most part we were successful in doing. So it was a very positive experience, and I am wishing that GPAC all the success going forward now that I'm retired. So,
thank you. Sarah?
Hello, everyone. I'm Sarah Gossman. I'm a professor at the University of Arkansas School of Law. I also sit in the board of the Pipeline Safety Trust, and I had to go back and look. I started on GPAC at the very end of 2016, and my first meeting was in January 2017, and I was on it until August, and I think probably many of you know this, but the GPAC and LPAC as then constituted, the members were terminated and then asked to reapply if they were interested in continuing on. So that process, as far as I know, is still ongoing in terms of the decision making. I was a public member, and I found it an incredibly positive experience. When I talk with my students about regulation and the very difficult challenges that agencies face in regulating and how they interact with stakeholders, this, I think, is one of the most successful models I've seen. And I think it really has to do with the fact that you have a group of stakeholders around who are listening to each other and thinking about policy in a very deliberative way. And when that happens, I think you can make successful and effective policy.
Hi, I am Lori Anderson. I am here as a member of the public, and I am a Colorado field organizer with Moms Clean Air Force. We are a community of over 1.6 million moms, dads, and caregivers united against air pollution, including the urgent crisis of our changing climate to protect our children's health. I have a slightly different experience because I'm actually a member of the public who lives in an area that is impacted by large-scale oil and gas development, aging infrastructure, and aging gathering lines and new gathering lines and flow lines that were put in to bring this new product from the large-scale fracking to a distribution station. And I will share that my first experience with GPAC, I have limited experience. My first experience with GPAC was prior to this virtual new method, but I actually had to fly to Virginia just to simply provide oral public comments. And it was during a period of time, this is November 2023, where I don't care who goes first. We either need PHMSA to lead and take the lead on advanced leak detection and repair and ensuring we have the enforcement, or Colorado can lead, but Colorado was deferring to PHMSA. So I felt like I was stuck in this loop. So I actually made that trip out to Virginia to give those specific public comments. And on the effectiveness, I don't know the nuances, but if they are truly effective, then they will be hearing from the public. They will be hearing from communities who have lived experience, and we will not be seeing, I'll get into this in answer to another question, but we won't be seeing the incidents and accidents in our communities because we will have highly effective rules that protect public health and safety across the nation. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Wilson. I work for Phillips 66, so operator representative, also a mom. And so I was on LPAC beginning in 2024. I participated in the one meeting earlier this year, a joint GPAC and LPAC meeting on standards updates. So as far as like the LPAC GPAC meetings, a relatively more simple, more aligned one. Like you heard, all of our tenures have been, I don't know what the legal term is, but we're not on them anymore, and they're going through the process. So I have reapplied, and it's a great honor to me to be even considered for that position. So as terms of effectiveness, I come from a place working with the LPAC with very limited experience. I had a great experience through the standards update meeting. Sides were heard, acknowledged, good conversation, but again, kind of limited because there was a lot of agreement along those lines. And I reapplied because I do firmly believe that we can make them effective, and we can have some good dialogue and get different perspectives.
All right, thanks, Stephanie. You know, my perspective on the committees is, you know, my experience is that it's one of the most rewarding parts of my job at PHMSA, and working with, you know, the stakeholders to come to consensus on a standard. There's, you know, at the end of long sessions, it's just very rewarding to say, well, we got through that. We got through LDAR, we got through gas transmission 1, and you know that you're ready to move on to the next step. And speaking of that, the next topic I wanted to talk about relates to the process. And I really didn't tell you what the process is, other than I told you how we stand the committee up and some important attributes of members. But, you know, when we get this group together, what do we do? What do they do? Well, first off, there's a notice that we're going to have a meeting. And where do you think we put that notice? It's a trick question. Federal Register, very good. And we are required to do at least 15 days beforehand. Says, okay, we're going to have this meeting. We give the location, or it'd be virtual. We've done both in the past. We've done hybrid. Now, pretty much we're going to be virtual, but so that announcement is made. And then there's all the work that goes into prepping for that meeting with the PHMSA staff that's ready to brief the committee, these 15 members of each committee. Just a lot of work behind the scenes. There are meetings with the committee to prep them for that meeting, to brief them. So they come ready for the meeting or the week of meetings to be able to you know, talk about it. So we really try to help the committee just prime the conversation and get them ready by having those preparatory briefings. That's a very important part of that. So on meeting day, I typically call the meeting to order as a designated federal official, and I will go over housekeeping, the usual stuff like that, and then I turn it over to the chair of the meeting. And typically, you know, it typically varies who chairs the meeting. It seems like we lean on Mr. Danner probably for most of the last few rulemakings, but which he's done a great job with chairing those meetings. But anyway, I appoint a chair, and I turn it over to the chair, and they run the meeting. And the sequence of events at the meeting is staff will present the rule. They'll describe the rule, talk about, you know, we issued this notice proposed rulemaking. We had a 60-day comment period, and we'll summarize the comments. And then we turn it over to the committee to deliberate. I want to make an important point there. The process did change, and the next thing we're going to talk about, and I wanted to get the perspectives of the committee on, was a change we made in the process that had the proceedings where we just turn it over to the committee. Previously, we would, or the PHMSA staff would present a possible draft position where that the committee may consider adopting based on the comments. But there was some discussion with our attorneys and just looking at improving the process, improving the organic nature of the committee working together and coming up with their recommendation and not having any kind of undue influence about a preconceived notion about the outcome by PHMSA. We left it really up to the committee to make the sausage on their own and really start with basically nothing. We provide the briefing and then the comments. So With that backdrop, and I know some of you have experienced both, but did that improve or did it make the process better, or was it not as good? Now, I have a perspective on it, but I will save that to the very end. Dave, and just for background too, to help you, if you look at the rules like gas transmission, RIN 1, RIN 2, RIN 3, those are 3 sections that used to be one big rule. The valve rule were done under the prior process, and then LDAR and classification change was done under the new process. So just your perspectives on how one-way worked, where we provided the kind of the entry level to see the conversation worked versus, okay, here it is, go for it. Here's what we heard. So.
I guess I'll take that on since I was there for both parts. So I'm conflicted because as a lawyer, I certainly understand the need to have a separate deliberative body that itself thinks through the regulation and works to consensus. I think as a public member and as somebody who really believes that the agency adds a tremendous value in terms of why it created the proposed rule it did and how you might structure language that would help the agency then to create, a better rule. Hopefully, that's the sort of hope that we are, that this is what the advisory committee does. So in that way, I felt the lack of the agency participating in the same sort of robust way, and that again, I understand it from a law point of view, and I never want to contradict lawyers for agencies. They have a very important role. But as a member, it just made it a little bit more difficult.
Thank you.
I would agree with that. I think that the advisory committees are really part of the administrative law process, or the Administrative Procedures Act that agencies have to follow when they're doing rulemaking. So they do seek public comment, and it's very helpful for us to hear a summary of those public comments, which is something that staff provides. And I think that staff is very objective, and I think they've shown themselves to be very credible. And so sometimes they will point to a comment and note that, well, what is being proposed is contrary to the law, and here's why. And that's the kind of stuff that actually speeds our deliberations, because they say, well, let's look for something else there. I think that without that, it just adds time to the deliberations. It does not quicken them in any way. I think it's much more efficient, and I think that the PHMSA staff, again, I think they're incredibly knowledgeable and incredibly competent, and it's very useful for us to hear what they have to say. That doesn't mean that we accept everything that they say. In fact, I would say that no, we tinkered with everything they gave us. So I would like to keep that process intact if the lawyers agree to it.
Lori, I have a question for you in a minute, but Stephanie, you want to swing at that one, or?
I did do some prep work for this and talked to some colleagues who have been longer standing members of LPAC. So I feel like I can speak on behalf of them as well regarding this question. And I think as an industry, and I nowhere near the legal realm, so fully respect, we have to make it work on that front as well. But from an industry, PHMSA coming in with both the summary of the comments that were made and where their head is or where their thinking is, based on the comments they received, the notice of proposed rulemaking process would be kind of a much more productive and more efficient use of time. And at the end of the day, PHMSA doesn't have to take the recommendations from the GPAC or LPAC. And so just as a kind of a starting point, let's kind of see where they're at, and we can build and kind of tweak with where they're at, and potentially throw them a new idea curveball every once in a while.
Okay. Thank you. Just to, I've really got to do a better job of explaining the process, but, so the committee deliberates, And I told you two different processes, the newer one and the old one that was just discussed. But what happens at the end of that process? And after a discussion is made on a particular code, a vote typically takes place, and there's voting language that is written by the committee, and then a vote is taken. And the wording on every vote, and really the charge of the committee, is that they are preparing a report and based on the technical feasibility, reasonableness, cost effectiveness, and practicality of a proposed rule. Every vote has that language in it. So, and that recommendation of that vote is part of the record. The report, as it's called in the charter, consists of the transcript of the meeting, the slides that are presented to the committee, and then the vote taken. Each voting provision is very important makes up part of the committee report. As far as my perspective on the process change, I was obviously intimately involved in all the committees up until last year. I will say that the new process where we really had the committee start from really ground zero, hearing the comments from a rule and hearing a briefing on the rule, that I thought it had some really good discussion in it, some really good dialogue. And I think my perspective was that people felt like they had a part in the process. Not that didn't happen before. However, I think while that's a good aspect of it, I do think it was less efficient, as I know you've heard already, and that it led to longer meetings. For LPAC alone, the leak detection and repair rule took 2 weeks, well, almost 2 weeks, because part of 1 week we looked at class location. But it does take a lot longer. It's a bit less efficient. And I don't know if there's maybe some in-between ground of where we're just very careful as the staff presents a possible starting point for the committee to make sure that the language is right, that this is only guidance. It's not really anything that the agency buys into, because one concern, at least from our attorneys, was that we as an agency have already bought into this position that's being displayed on the screen, and we don't want that, and that was never the intent. And then just concerns over how maybe some of the discussions in the meetings went as far as how the agency was making commitments that maybe they shouldn't have made or they can't make in a meeting like that, because the outcome of the meeting is advisory in nature. It's given to the administrator to develop a final rule, and it's not mandatory that the administrator takes that advice. It is important, though, that if the final rule varies from that advice given, that it's explained in the rule. That's a key aspect of the process. Next, related to public participation, I have a quick question for you, Laurie. You participated in the meetings as a member of the public. I know you traveled all the way out from Colorado to one of our meetings, and from your vantage point in working through that process of getting there and being there, how effective do you think the process was? PHMSA had in facilitating a meaningful public engagement in the meeting? And what could the agency do to make participation a little bit more accessible or impactful?
Oh, thank you. Appreciate this question. And this is also going back in time again, and that trip out to Virginia. And this is back to that period of time where we are still trying to advance some of the public safety in Colorado, but I'll have to say that I wasn't the only one that went to Virginia and took the time to go there. Patricia Garcia Nelson is in the audience here, and there's another individual from Alaska, and we really just wanted to come in to talk about the advanced leak detection. And what made this so difficult was that you have to wait for that specific rule to come up. And when you're making plane tickets and hotel arrangements and trying to arrange child care for your children, and trying to land on the exact right amount of time, we realized that just being there for 2 days, it didn't actually afford us that opportunity. We were watching the rules carefully, came in on the day when the tentative schedule would have been on the agenda, and then it became really awkward because we had been there for a day and a half, and realizing there is no way, understanding that the technical nature of the rules doesn't allow for there to be a certain schedule. But we ended up in this moment, and I gotta say I'm very appreciative to those on the GPAC and PHMSA who worked with us, but we stood up there one by one making public comments at a time that wasn't actually on that specific rule. So I'm thinking we need to find a better way to provide that opportunity for public engagement. And with the virtual option, that will help, but then you also lose that in-person part. And I wanna just quickly focus here on some of the reasons this is so important to us and why these voices are so important. I live, as I said, in Colorado, heavily impacted by oil and gas. There was the Firestone explosion in 2017 that killed a couple of people and severely injured the mom, and that was related to a flow line. The Niagarans and their rural gathering line, which completely took their property from them. Their whole entire house was demolished. They never were able to return to their farm. There was the recent 2025 underground pipeline gas line spill in La Plata County. And then also, there's so many undetected pipeline issues, which we found in Broomfield, where I am from, where our air quality monitoring, which was set up to protect our communities from the large-scale oil and gas development, we actually used that to triangulate and find a pipeline leak in Broomfield, which fortunately was repaired before that became also an incident. So these voices are so incredible to be heard from. And one other quick comment on this is we can make a written comment to PHMSA, but you cannot capture the heartfelt realities of what's going on in your communities in a written comment. And then unless we actually show up at GPAC, we can't make those public comments and have those heard before GPAC, and then it's just they're hearing from industry, and when they're making their recommendations, they're not hearing our public voices. So I guess I would show those as the challenges and obstacles, and the hope is that we can make improvements here. I don't have an answer to it, but to find those ways to incorporate public voices on those specific rules will be amazing. So thank you.
No, go ahead.
Thank you very much. I think that your comments, Lori, are really spot on. In Olympia, Washington, where our commission is located, and by the shout out to my former colleagues from the commission who are here, we do a hybrid. Basically, the commissioners meet, our meetings are in person, but we live stream them, and we take testimony both in person and virtually. And I think that allows for the GPAC, I think there's a real value in having in-person ability to confer, to be able to float an idea in the hallway before you see whether you have the courage to bring it up in front of the whole group is really useful, and it's helped us in a lot of ways to get past things. Can you imagine 15 people from various industries trying to wordsmith? I mean, that's hard. So I don't like losing the in-person part of it. But what Lori said about the testimony, you know, we took testimony, I think it was on a Tuesday afternoon, on a matter that we didn't actually get to discuss until Thursday. So she's making testimony that is interrupting the flow of the earlier conversation. It lessens the impact, although I've got to say, when Julie Nygren made her testimony in front of us, that was very powerful. She's the one in Johnstown, Colorado that Lori mentioned. But it's very important that people don't have to make all these arrangements to fly to Virginia to talk to us if they can just get on Zoom and talk to us that way. So I think a hybrid is really the way we should be looking at it.
All right, I will just also advocate that the industry is very favorable to making this as easy as possible. I don't know a solution either, but I think maybe it's a multi-pronged solution for the public to be able to advocate for their positions during these meetings, and for all members of each of the GPAC and LPAC to truly hear it as well.
Sure.
Yeah, so thank you so much for raising these issues, because it is, for me, the biggest downside of the process. So I feel like the deliberative process among people on the committee is very, very good and leads to good results. What isn't so good is the way that we take public comment. And I think it's, both a structural set of barriers, right? You're always going to have, it's going to be more difficult for public members to be able to engage in these processes because, they're not in the industry and being paid to be there as part of their jobs. That's just the sort of reality of regulation. And I think we've got to do a better way. We've got to find better ways of incorporating public comment. And I think that, if you look in a room and you see that 99% of people are from a particular stakeholder group, right, and that's who you're hearing from, that makes the deliberative process less knowledgeable because you're sort of hearing a particular perspective. So, and I'm just grateful that you came all the way out from Colorado to give your testimony, and it was really powerful.
Just a little history too. When I first started at PHMSA and was involved in some of our advisory committees, they were much smaller. I think originally these, with this step in the process being at the tail end of a very long deliberative process for rulemaking, the idea was to assemble, these 15 stakeholders that were representative of the interests of the public, the government, and the industry to come together. They've always been public, but I would say probably since 2010, post San Bruno, post Marshall, Michigan, there's been just so much more interest in all the deliberations that go on and being able to see those that go on at PHMSA. That, before in the early days, we may have a conference room at DOT headquarters, and you may have a few seats around the perimeter of a big table that had a few members of the public who happened to stroll in, to more recently where we had to plan for quite a few audience members, up to say about 150, I think is what we usually plan for. So it really grew in popularity. I will say a little pro tip though, like I said, this is a tail end of the process and it is one more bite at the apple. But I would say, as a member of the public or anyone, to be involved in the process, be involved early. And that's why, you can subscribe to notices on what's going on, what proposed rules are going out there. Advanced notice of proposed rulemakings. There are many opportunities to engage in the process, and I would recommend to not wait till the end. Certainly, the end at the advisory committee is open to the public, and that's designed that way to be another avenue, but it's very helpful if you start early in the process and help shape things as they go along. Let's see. Okay, another question for the panelists. As you know, there is the replacement of current or former members, I guess now former members of GPAC and LPAC going on. What do you see as the implications of this turnover of the committees on the effectiveness and public accountability? And does this level of turnover, the complete flipping of the committee risk weakening continuity and expertise, or can it be managed in a way that strengthens input? Who wants to start with that one? Question relates to the changing, firing all of you and then reappointing you.
I'll take it on. So, I want to start by saying again, I'm a law professor, right? So the agency clearly has authority here to appoint the members and has the discretion to do so. And I think every committee member serves at the discretion of the agency. I also believe that it is important to bring new voices to the table, that to have new people around sort of invigorates the discussion, brings in new perspectives. And I think that can be helpful to a deliberative process. I think one thing I very much noted about when I first joined the committee was the culture of the deliberation, the fact that people really sat and listened to each other and asked questions, that it was a problem-solving type of discussion, which didn't mean we didn't sometimes get into it, right? And really sort of work through conflict. I mean, you can't avoid conflict about really important issues, but just that people were respectful of each other. If you start with a whole new group of people, you lose that opportunity to show that culture, right, around decision making. And so that would be the one thing that I would worry about if everyone were replaced, is just sort of how do you sort of pass down that deliberative nature of the body so that it continues to work, I think, in the way that it works best.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think that the group really had, it had a mix of interests. It had safety advocates, it had environmental advocates, it had industry advocates from different industries, it had state, local, and federal people. So one of the big questions I have is who is going to lose the seat? What interest group is going to lose the seat at the table? And is that going to make the deliberations more or less comprehensive, and the result more fair or less fair? I mean, because one of the things that this group did is they worked for consensus. We had people that you would think wouldn't be able to agree on anything, but we just stayed there and day after day after day until we arrived at consensus. And there were very few instances where we actually had a majority-minority split on the advisory committee. And it was really helpful, to really understand the positions of other people. And so we did develop a lot of respect for each other. And I hope that that's maintained. It might be that the new appointees are going to be miles ahead of the old appointees. And there's also a concern that you are going to lose a lot of viewpoints on the committee if it's restructured in the wrong way.
Anyone else?
Sure, and I'm going to answer this one as it really depends on who is appointed as to the effectiveness. I'm not super confident that under the current administration that the public health is going to be prioritized. And we have as moms, we're looking out for the future of our children and for the air that they're breathing now and the future of our climate, and those should be the priorities. But it really will depend on who's appointed. And I think the technical expertise and the industry perspectives are much harder to replace because it's so ingrained, but then there's also the priority of the public interest and ensuring there's so much more of a focus on frontline communities and the impacted the communities out there. And I think regardless of what happens, the mission of PHMSA cannot be forgotten, and that's to protect health and safety. So thank you.
Okay. Just a couple of thoughts. First off, having been involved in finding potential members, potential candidates to run through the vetting process, it can be challenging to get people with the requisite knowledge. Ideally, you have someone that has some level of technical knowledge, deep technical knowledge related to pipeline safety. Can you imagine how easy that is for members of the public that may be qualified to be on the committee? It can be pretty daunting to find someone with that requisite knowledge. I can remember, Sarah, when you were appointed, you had recently spoken at our risk workshop. I think it was way back in 2015 on risk modeling, and you presented on risk. And I thought, wow, we've got to get Sarah on our committee. And after that point, she was appointed. So we looked into having you, and you were just such an incredible member. And of course, Dave was a commissioner, and the commissioners are a common government representative on the committee. We also had Diane Berman, who was from New York. She was on the GPAC she was a commissioner. And then we also have state representatives who are members as well. But it can be a challenge to even find commissioners that have the knowledge for LPAC, for instance, because not many states really deal with liquid pipelines. So that can be a challenge, but we're always looking. I say we are, the agency is always looking I know now I think they should be pretty far along on the vetting process for a potential new slate of members. But if you're interested or you think you'd have an interest and you have that desire to work with an awesome group and do something that's so important to the country, I recommend you exploring, ways to be involved by potentially down the road becoming a member. All the appointments are made by the secretary, and my recommendation of a candidate is merely a recommendation, but it's ultimately the call of the administration. Okay, a quick question. I think you've already covered this one. Let me go to one that's been of interest, and that is how often the committee meets. The charter says the committees meet up to 4 times a year. As you know, in the past, the committees have not met 4 times a year. The committees have not met probably, but maybe 1 time a year. LPAC, I think, even 1 a year without it. What's the right amount of times to meet? To look at, not just rulemaking, but other items like policy updates, research and development, advising not just on rulemaking, but on other matters that the agency deals with. What's your perspective on, is it too much right now, or should we do more or less?
I would love to have more and longer meetings because I thought they were that important. At the same time, I think all 15 members have day jobs, and to get them to meet more than 4 times a year, even virtually, is a real commitment. And if you make it harder for people to get on, you are not going to find the same commitment by people to apply and join and participate, and I think that would be a real loss. I read there was a letter to Congress by INGA, the Interstate Natural Gas Association of America, saying that we should be meeting more often, and I was scratching my head about that because I can't imagine how much time I could spend to fly from Seattle to Washington, D.C., to commit to this. And so it could be that you could have briefings that are shorter and on smaller or more discrete topics, but I just think that it would be very hard to meet more than 4 times a year, and even 4 times is tough.
Thank you.
So I struggle with this because, yes, I feel like when we met, it was incredibly powerful, and I really did believe in the process. I do think that particularly from the public perspective, if we expect people to leave their day jobs and go to DC, and even for me, I have a very nice life as a law professor, but 2 weeks away from law school with my first-year law students who are all asking me questions about their course and very anxious about their materials. That was a challenge. So I feel like it's a very important set of work, but we need to be careful again to be thinking about people's other obligations. And if it was rough for me, it's going to be rougher for people whose jobs are not flexible at all. And I want those people to have the experience too.
And as someone who has never met as part of GPAC and LPAC, I can definitely feel that pain. And just want to share also that there is a sense of urgency because as time goes by and stronger rules are not put in and technological advances were brought up, and are the regulations keeping up? I think there's a sense of urgency as well, but understand those time constraints.
I guess my perspective is we should meet at the time needed for regulation, to your point. We need to keep up with the pace, and PHMSA has had some pace this year. I think we can all agree on that. And so we need to be prepared to commit the time to keep up with that. And I do think maybe, I think somebody had mentioned like a briefing session or an educational type of session, maybe not as required, but could help to fill in what's what's the gap between the different meetings?
You know, from my perspective, having dealt with this question and different perspectives, I've seen both positions by committee members that some say they meet too much, some say they meet too little. I think what's important, you know, regardless of the frequency, when the committee does meet, it you know, should be important enough that there's an ask of the committee to provide guidance. I think we got criticism after a meeting that was held. I remember it was at the DC waterfront that pretty much briefings on National Academy studies, a variety of things that were of interest, but I think there was a concern that maybe, you know, there was no vote at that meeting and maybe we should have combined it. So maybe there's opportunity to create some efficiencies regarding that to kind of, you know, maybe do policy making and look at briefings on what's going on. There's also been discussion about using the committees more for, and it's in the realm of the charter, is to use them more to help guide on things like research and development. So anyway, what we're going to do now is, I know we're short on, not that short on time, but we have enough time for some questions. So who wants to be the first taker? Oh, and by the way, I failed to recognize Bob Hill is a former GPAC member. He's in the back with the cool hat. But Bob was a very valuable member of the committee, so thank you for your service. And did I miss anyone who was on it?
Lois Epstein here on the left, and Masood.
Oh, Lois Epstein, of course. Yes, you were on LPAC. My apologies. Before my time, before my tenure, but yes. Okay, questions?
Question from Bill Burt.
This is a very important one. Years ago, when I started getting involved in the committees, one of the industry associations would sponsor coffee, and now there was some kind of conflict, so they stopped doing that. But seems to me we ought to be able to work that out. So there's more than water at these 2-week-long meetings.
That was actually a fun, that was funny, Bill. We always say, well, we're trying to attack the deficit, so we'll provide water that was included in the hotel contract. But, okay.
I'll second that
Next.
too.
Oh, yeah.
I've had the opportunity to serve on a couple of those committees with different agencies, with 2 totally different agencies. So I have heard this with a lot of interest and comparing to my experiences. And it sounds like this committee really has had more responsibility. And the fact that, I mean, we never even considered a 2-week meeting. And now we got assignments that some of us ended up serving on committees and then needing to meet weekly for a period of time to answer something and then put a proposal out. Ultimately, for the last one, I chose not to reapply because consumer was in the name of the committee, but it was dominated by industry in every way and controlled that way. And I came to believe that it wasn't making a difference. This committee seems these seem very different than the ones I've served on because we had the charter, you know, all that stuff, but it's set up differently. So it's kind of telling me that agencies work in different ways. Very good point. I think, you know, I think, Sarah, you alluded to it, or I know we've talked about it in terms of our GPAC and LPAC have been examples of really how the system has worked well in the federal government. That's not to mean it can't be improved, but, you know, there even distribution of stakeholders. That's not to say that Bambi, you know, the Goliath and Bambi, the Bambi feels outnumbered because, you know, the industry has a lot of resources, government has resources, and that's why the agency has really gone to great lengths to brief the committee and help explain what's going on and really prep the members before. Yeah. Okay.
I'm sorry, I stole that question, but anyone want to take a swing at that too?
No, I mean, just the membership was basically, the structure was set up in law. And so, PHMSA was complying with the law. But I also think that we were very fortunate in the individuals that, the industry people were, I just can't say enough about them. I was thinking it was going to be very adversarial. And in fact, it was. Nobody caved on their position, but we spent time working through it. And I think that was very valuable.
Yeah, I don't want to come off as Pollyannish, because I can certainly come up with criticisms, and I think a big one is this question of how people engage with the process outside of it. But I will say, I mean, it is the kind of experience that I think, as somebody who studies regulation and advisory committees, I mean, this is a very amazing model, and it is not true across agencies. And I think it has everything to do with the agency's commitment to these issues and its willingness to essentially give power, right, to a group of people to really work through some of the policy issues and listen carefully. And not every agency is going to do that, and there aren't going to be always the right people around the table to do that properly in a way that makes the agency continue to want to allow for that. But I think it has been, it really has been an amazing experience to watch it in action.
The other thing is, we're trying to achieve consensus, and there were 15 of us on the committee, but we had 100 people behind us in the room, and they all had a chance to speak. And so you get into this consensus mindset, and you start hearing people's perspectives from various companies and various communities across the country. And all of that informs what we were doing. And that, it's one of the reasons that we had very long meetings. But I just think that, that was also what helped us get to something that everybody could hold their nose and agree to.
Okay, 5 minutes. In my 5 minutes, before I get to that, I missed one former member. I can't believe you didn't call me out. You said you were going to help me.
You always miss me.
But no, Masoud Tahamtani was a member of Liquid Pipeline Advisory Committee when he was at the State of Virginia, Commonwealth of Virginia Commission, State Corporation Commission. And I will say this, Masoud ran the tightest ship. He would share the LPAC, and my gosh, everyone was in line, and he was very strict, very effective. But we miss you, Masoud. Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I had one question and comment that I would think that this group might have some insight into. So I think on the public comment piece, there's a real challenge that you all have outlined of how the committee, it takes and hears public comment. But I think one of the other frustrations with PHMSA's rulemaking process from the public interest perspective is that seems to be the only place where there is public comment taken other than written comments. And that is different from other agencies. There are public hearings held. It's very rare that PHMSA does that. And I do think that there is opportunity for the agency to consider additional public hearings on their rulemakings as they're in process to provide additional input to the agency itself. Because one of the reasons members of the public come to the GPAC and LPAC is for the agency to hear their perspective. And that could provide another avenue that makes some of the logistical challenges around LPAC and GPAC a little bit easier to handle and figure out. And that, EPA does a lot of public hearings. They do them in person and virtually. Other agencies do that all the time. From a public interest perspective, I think there's a lot of frustration that it seems like that is not even considered in the PHMSA world. So I don't know if you all have thoughts on how to integrate those.
Yeah, go ahead, Masoud. You want to? I do have a comment on that, but yeah.
Good point, good question. We don't hold public hearings because there's connotation with hearings and all that. But for example, for the CO2 rulemaking, we held a public meeting in Iowa, went to the place where these pipelines were supposed to be built, and we had approximately 400 people that showed up, another 600 online, all that information then informed our rulemaking. All that information was part of the docket. So I just wanted to mention that we do that public meeting to inform our rulemakings.
Welcome and allowed for the agency to really get additional input, which I think it was an absolutely wonderful thing that was done. I would like to also see that post NPRM when people actually have something to respond to as well, to be able to give additional insight in ways that they think is a little bit maybe more impactful for them.
Appreciate the input. I mean, the CO2 was one example, and I know there was interest in having it right at ground zero where CO2 development was going on, and that was the request. And I have 1 minute that I'll just say one other. You know, there are other places where we've held public meetings, not a hearing, but a meeting, like for leak detection. Early on in the Biden administration, for instance, we had early that year, we had a meeting on leak detection repair, and we gathered public comments. It was really a good meeting to get public comments for that. We did it on gas transmission. We do it where we really need to, there's controversy, and where we need to get that public input. The input is really valued. You know, we just need to make sure we do more, they do more. But the agency has really gone to great lengths to be transparent and get input from the public through a number of avenues. And again, like I said, get involved early. Don't wait for this final, the pointing end of the spear when it's getting ready to be shot. Don't wait till the very end of it, but get involved early. It's my pro tip, as I was saying. I think we're at the end, right? We don't have any more questions or the capacity for any more, but we'll be around the conference. Feel free to grab one of us if you have any other things you'd like to talk about. Thanks for the discussion today, and thanks to the panelists. Nice job. And have a good rest of the conference.